let's break down what defenses you have to start heading into week 4 of 2024 fantasy football, plus the top streaming options that you can add off of the waiver wire for defensive special teams slots in fantasy leagues as we approach week 4 of the season. Before we do so, let me remind you guys that Underdog is the place you want to be if you want to get in on additional fantasy football action all season long. Their week 3 pick'ems for Monday Night Football are live. And if you guys want to claim a free Joe Burrow over half of a total yard pick'em, you can do so by signing up with promo code THECATCH. That link is down below. And don't worry, if you guys sign up later in the week, you are still going to receive a free pick'em. On top of that, all new users on Underdog who sign up with promo code THECATCH are going to receive a 50% deposit match up to $1,000. So that's a free pick'em to use towards week 4 action and up to $1,000 in bonus cash on Underdog when you sign up with promo code THECATCH. All right, and let me start the video by saying this is not a great week for streaming defenses overall, but I think I have a couple options that you can still pick up off the waiver wire and start this week, as well as a couple teams that we absolutely have to start in week 4. All right, first and foremost, the New York Jets might be 95% rostered, but they have had some weaknesses to start this season outside of week 3. You know, their run defense was really weak the first 2 games of the season. That definitely changed in week 3. And overall, they didn't really have a huge bang to start the season with 2 fantasy points in week 1 and a solid 11 in week 2. But you almost expected more in week 2 going up against Will Levis. Not that 11 fantasy points is anything to sneeze at. Those double digits still a nice addition to your overall lineup. But in week 3, they looked absolutely dominant. I mean, the reason why they were one of the highest drafted teams in fantasy drafts and leagues that play with defensive special teams slots. 17 fantasy points, 7 sacks, a forced fumble, didn't have an interception, but this week they will face Bo Nix and the Denver Broncos at home, and I absolutely love this matchup. I will say that week 3, Bo Nix didn't look so bad. Ended up getting a dub on the road against Tampa Bay and had his first game this year where he did not throw an interception. But I think that'll change in week 4, going back to that pattern we saw in the first 2 games with Bo Nix where he had at least 1 interception in each game against the New York Jets. I think this defense continues to be dominant in week 4. If you own them, you're not streaming a defense this week. If they are for some reason out there in your league, which I'm going to go ahead and say that they're not, you're starting them, right? They are literally the must-start defense of the week. It gets a little bit tougher after this week as they're going to face the Vikings and the Bills, but still the Jets are just going to be one of these teams that if you own them, we're going to start them on a week in, week out basis. And if for some reason you're looking at what Bo Nix and the Broncos did this past week and you're thinking about streaming elsewhere, don't do it. The Jets at home against Bo Nix and the Broncos, an absolute smash play in week 4. All right, next up, let's talk about the Minnesota Vikings on the road facing the Green Bay Packers. They are currently the defense number 1 in fantasy football with another great dominant performance in week 3 against a good Houston Texans offense. And if you go back to last week's video, I didn't talk about the Minnesota Vikings, but I ended up putting them in the comment section down below and in the pinned comment and said, you probably still pick up the Vikings if you can. Going into week 3, they're only 16% rostered, which at this point, that's going to change. But, you can still pick them up, start them against the Texans. They'll probably still have a solid day. And I didn't exactly expect them to be as dominant as they were. They only allowed 7 points to the Texans offense in week 3. They had 5 sacks, 2 interceptions. They're playing out of their minds. Great football, defensive football right now. So they are on the road. And some people might be looking at this and kind of thinking the logic is if Malik Willis starts again for the Green Bay Packers in week 4, then this is like a great stream, a great start. But whether it's Malik Willis, who played very well, was handed to him in week 3 against his former team, the Tennessee Titans, or it's Jordan Love back and healthy. And I will say, with Malik Willis winning 2 games in a row, I don't think the Packers are really rushing Jordan Love back out there, but we'll see what happens. We know that they probably want Jordan Love out there. Regardless, it does not matter. We're not going to make the same mistake as last week where we look at this Vikings defense, say, they're playing Jordan Love and, dynamic offense, and the Packers probably get something similar to what we got from the Packers in week 1. If Jordan Love starts, it doesn't matter. The Vikings are a team, a defensive team. We can start week in and week out at this point. I mean, maybe if they're facing, the best offense in the league or whatever, but you look at this upcoming schedule, right? The Packers this week, then the Jets, a bye week, the Lions. Like, I don't really love the Lions, and the Rams, the Colts, the Jaguars, the Titans, the Bears, the Cardinals, Falcons. We'll see how they're looking in week 14. The Bears, the Seahawks, and Packers. Again, it's a really strong schedule for the Minnesota Vikings defense. The number 1 scoring defense in fantasy football went into week 3 at just 16% rostered. They're an absolute must add on the waiver wire. They're an absolute must start in fantasy football until further notice. All right, next up, another highly rostered team in the Pittsburgh Steelers going up against the Indianapolis Colts in week 4. 88% rostered, so, it's unlikely that you're going to be able to pick them up as they continue to be dominant overall. 12 points in week 1, 13 in week 2, and 10 points in week 3. They had 5 sacks against the Chargers, a forced fumble, and only allowed 168 total yards of offense. And they are an absolute must start again against the Colts in week 4. You might be looking at the Colts, Anthony Richardson, there's playmakers, Jonathan Taylor. Doesn't matter. And I'll tell you what, Anthony Richardson in his last 2 games, panic meter is high. 2 interceptions in week 3, just 24 yards on the ground, and most importantly, just 167 yards through the air. Anthony Richardson is not going to scare this Pittsburgh Steelers defense anytime soon. So if you're looking at the Colts, this is a home game for the Colts and away game for the Steelers. Don't overthink it. The Steelers are a smash play once again in week 4, and not a team we can afford to put on the bench and try and stream maybe another defensive team that potentially has more upside. Anthony Richardson, 5 interceptions in his last 2 games. Do not bench the Steelers. They are a must-start defense as we approach week 4. All right, moving along to another streaming option similar to the Vikings. The Saints come in at just 17% rostered. They'll face the Falcons in week 4. At the time I'm recording this, Sunday Night Football is not wrapped up. Monday Night Football has not been played. So, point being, I don't really know how the Falcons have looked against the Chiefs completely here tonight. But at the end of the day, I think the Saints are still going to be an option stream-wise in week 4 because they've been really solid through the first 3 weeks. Like, I don't know if their upside's crazy high. I don't know if they're necessarily going to be one of these teams that has a ton of turnovers in week 4, but they're a really safe floor play. And I will say they have been getting after the football and they have been causing turnovers. And Tyrann Mathieu has been a ball hawk so far to start the season. They have at least 1 interception in each game this year, as well as 1 forced fumble in each game this year. So I'm not really worried about them going up against the Falcons because they've done that against the Panthers, but then the Cowboys and the Eagles too. So this is a unit that will cause turnovers, and they've also had at least 3 sacks in each game. They're allowing a lot of offensive yards, but it just hasn't mattered. 15 fantasy points week 1, 8 week 2, and 11 in week 3. They just continue to be a solid week in, week out start. It's a little bit of a tough stretch, at Atlanta, at Kansas City. Maybe they disappoint us, but then they get a home matchup against Tampa Bay, a home matchup against Denver. Then they're on the road against the Chargers and the Panthers for that second matchup against the Panthers. So I do think they are definitely worth rostering and definitely worth a stream as we approach week 4. All right, next up, let's talk about the Cleveland Browns. And when I put them on the list for today, I didn't realize that they were actually 93% roster, but it makes sense because they were a top ad last week going up against the Giants. So we'll talk about that in a second, but they get the Raiders this week. So we look back to that matchup in week 3 against the Giants. I think everyone was expecting, including myself. Daniel Jones looked good in week 2, but played Washington in week 1. He looked awful. Should be turnover upside in week 3. And it just didn't happen. Daniel Jones played pretty decent football for the most part. And the Browns walked away with just 1 forced fumble, no interceptions, 2 sacks, allowed 340 yards or 340 total offensive yards and 21 total points, and walked away with just 7 fantasy points. Like an okay floor, but that upside that we wanted just wasn't there. But now as we enter week 4, I think what's going to happen is you're going to see a lot of fantasy managers drop the Browns because they played bad in week 3, so it might be a potential drop, and they get another nice opportunity on the road against the Raiders in week 4. Gardner Minshew has at least 1 interception in every game this year, and he's fumbled in 2 out of 3 games this year so far. Plus, overall, offensively, the Raiders just had their worst performance in week 3, surprisingly, against the Carolina Panthers. So I think this is a nice opportunity for the Browns to kind of bounce back, maybe have a little bit of a higher ceiling, but at worst, have a solid floor. So I know they're highly rostered, but maybe they get dropped in your league coming off of a poor performance against the New York Giants. So if they do, I think they're a solid stream, solid start overall if the Browns become available as we approach week 4. Last but not least, let's take a look at the Tennessee Titans, who will travel to face the Miami Dolphins in week 4. So the Titans have been very bad. Very bad. They had 4 points in week 1 against the Bears, 2 in week 2 against the Jets, and then 3 in week 3 against the Green Bay Packers with, their former backup quarterback, and Malik Willis starting for the Packers. So this Titans defense is not good. I mean, look back to just last week. I mean, really on the whole season, they have 1 forced fumble. That's it. No interceptions and just 1 forced fumble and nothing else. I mean, only 2 to 3 sacks each game. So this has been a bad defense all year long, and they've had a couple opportunities playing against Caleb Williams in week 1. Aaron Rodgers has been fine, but maybe not in week 2. But then week 3 once again they got Malik Willis, and they were awful against Malik Willis. So this is a streaming option that brings some upside to the table, because right now when we look at the Miami Dolphins offense, we are more than likely going to get Tim Boyle at quarterback in week 4. I mean, there's a possibility now that Skylar Thompson is dealing with that rib injury and Tua is out until further notice, that maybe we get Tyler Huntley, who the Dolphins signed shortly after the Tua concussion, or maybe we see the Dolphins go out and sign a free agent like Mike White or Ryan Tannehill or something, and maybe that limits the Titans' upside defensively this week. But if Tim Boyle is going to start for the Dolphins, we have at least got to take a shot at whatever defense is streaming against Tim Boyle and company, because I'm just not very confident. And I mean, maybe he was a little bit better than we might expect against Seattle. 7 of 13 for 79 yards and 1 rush for 6 total rushing yards, no touchdowns, no picks. But that wasn't really against the Seattle Seahawks defense that at that point in the game was playing 100%, let's be honest. So I think it'll look a little bit different. It is a home game for the Dolphins. The Titans are on the road. We'll have to see. There's still playmakers on this Dolphins team, but you guys get the point. If we get a 3rd-string quarterback starting for the Dolphins, we at least got to take a shot on streaming the Titans against that 3rd-string quarterback and company moving into week 4. That'll do it for today's video. Don't forget, guys, I'm answering all fantasy football questions in the comment section down below. If you guys need anything whatsoever moving into week 4 of 2024 fantasy football, please let me know and I'll get back to you as soon as I possibly can. Don't forget, as the week goes on, we're going to have everything that you guys need for week 4 of 2024 fantasy football here on the channel. Our panic video from Sunday night is already out. Our must-add waiver wire additions are already out for the week. And as the week goes on, we're going to have start sits at every position: running back, wide receiver, quarterback, tight end, as well as tons of more fantasy content and fantasy Q&A streams coming out all week long. So make sure you guys are subscribed to the channel. I truly appreciate it. And with that, I'll say thank you guys so much for watching and or listening. And remember, you saw it here on The Catch.